sparks, they're gonna fly. There's beauty in the making when you're taking your time. Sure as heck beats working 9 to 5. It's easy when you love it and you're busy living that sharp life. It's easy when you love it and you're busy living that sharp life. Yeah, it's easy when you love it and you're busy living that sharp life. All right.
Now that we've had a tour of the shop and we've taken a look at some of the machines and the tools that go into knife making, the way I do it, what I want to do is review some of the materials that go into the various types of knives, both materials that are natural, materials that are man-made, and we're going to start off with blade materials, which are going to be, of course, some sort of steel or metal. So we're going to start off, number one, with the blade material. So I use various kinds of steel. I'm not restricted to just one type, but I do have some favorites. Basic steels that I tend to work with is one of them is the CPM 154, and I buy it in bars usually. Sometimes you can buy it in sheets also. And I'm going to show you why I buy it in bars in just a minute. This is another material that's pretty popular. This comes from Sweden. It's called RWL 34. And it's a stainless tool steel. It's made by the Damas Steel Company, but it's not pattern welded. It has no pattern to it at all. And it's a very good steel. It's a modern steel, and I like it a whole lot. The second plain steel, and I'm talking about non-pattern, is CPM MagnaCut. And CPM MagnaCut is a tough steel to work with, but it's a great new knife blade steel. It holds an edge wonderfully. Because of that, because it holds an edge, it's abrasion resistant. It's also resistant to grinding and polishing. So it requires more work, but the product is really superior. This is the steel that I'm using mostly on my knives, but this is the steel, the CPM 154, that I'm going to use during this series to make the ATCF. And CPM stands for Crucible Powdered Metallurgy. It's basically the 154 CM. I don't want to confuse people with too many numbers, but the CPM, meaning powdered metallurgy, it's a different way of making the steel when they melt it, and it provides for a tighter structure and a little bit more hardness in the heat treating process. So this is the steel I started out with basically, and it's the steel that I'm going to use in this series. And one thing I want to show you, I have the 2-inch wide strip that I buy, and the reason I do that is that I can make 2 blades out of the same width. That's just an economical way of utilizing the steel, which can become very expensive if you buy it, as I buy it, cleaned and surface ground. The next type of steel that I also use is what's known as pattern welded or Damascus. Pattern welded is a process of making a design in the steel with different kinds of metal, different types of steel, forged, reforged, stretched out, reforged again many times, and then patterned with different kinds of punches. And these are made by blacksmiths. Chad Nichols, this is Vegas Forge. Here's another Chad Nichols design. This one he calls Galactic Bacon. Don't ask me why. And this is Damas steel, which has also become very popular. It's made in Sweden. It's a production material, not made by an individual blacksmith, but really, really nice to work with and makes a beautiful, beautiful knife. So these are the basic materials from which I make my knife blades. And then we're going to go into the handle material. Handle materials are a little bit simpler, and there aren't quite as many of them. Handle materials are usually bought in sheets. Individuals who make knives at home can use a material like stainless steel or titanium. The stainless steel that's most recommended is 410 or 416 heat treated because it makes a good springy material, especially for a liner lock. But the material most commonly used both in custom knives and in factory knives today, coming from all over the world, is titanium. And most titanium that's suitable for this is what's known as 6Al4V. That means 6% aluminum, 4% vanadium. There's another formula, GR2, which is okay, and it's usable and just as springy. A little bit less expensive, but the go-to material nowadays is the 6Al4V titanium. Titanium can also be used in a more complex material, and from Chad Nichols, it's called mokutai. And it's many types of titanium, which are hammered together, much like pattern welded steel, and it comes out with a series of really beautiful patterns that can be heat colored, as you can see this piece is, or anodized, but heat coloring is preferred. And also there's another company that makes it from Alpha, and this is Damascus, and they call it Damascus to sound like Damascus. But basically it's the same type of material, titanium, heat colored, in various hammered in patterns. And this is the material that, these materials can all be used for handles. They can be used for bolsters. This material I use a lot for bolsters too. We're not going to go into bolsters in this series, but we will be using 6Al4V for the handles of the ATCF that I'm going to be making during this series. And now we're going to go to take a look at the scale materials, both natural and man-made. So one of the earliest materials that was used on custom handmade knives is micarta. And micarta is an interesting material. There are three ways of making it. One is with paper, the second is with linen, and the third is with canvas. And basically the material is compressed with a phenolic resin under pressure and heat, and it forms a very strong, resilient, and dielectric, that means it won't conduct electricity, material which is used originally for electrical blocks to prevent any kind of short circuit. But it was discovered as a handle material probably by Bob Lovelace in the early 50s. And it's been one of the most popular materials because it's relatively easy to work with. It's, as I said, very strong, and it comes in a variety of colors, patterns, and thicknesses. It can be cut with a bandsaw. It can be drilled and tapped, filed very easily. It lends itself very nicely to a handle scale material of the handmade knife, whether it's a kitchen knife, or a fixed blade, or a folder. Micarta is really one of the easiest materials to work with, especially for a beginning knife maker. And we're going to move on to the next category, which is G10. Now, G10 is very similar to micarta in that it's compressed with a resin under great pressure and heat, and it forms an extremely strong, almost unbendable, and very resilient material. It's totally weatherproof, just like micarta, rainproof, waterproof, whatever you want to call it. And it comes in, once again, a great variety of colors and thicknesses. It's a little bit more difficult to work because it does burn if you don't have a really sharp belt on your grinder, or if you're grinding it or trying to polish it too fast. It will char or burn. I don't recommend cutting it on a bandsaw. A lot of people do. The dust is really bad for you. It's glass. G10 basically is a glass fiber composite. And while you can cut it on a bandsaw, it's not something that you really want to do. When I cut my pieces out of G10, whether it's handle material or backspacer, I use a wet diamond saw, either a disc saw or a ring saw used for stained glass. It works very well, makes no dust, and it's loud, but cuts really beautifully any kind of G10. So this is G10. This is one that's become very popular. It's called Jade Ghost. It's basically what the original color was, natural. It's kind of a greenish. And another popular one, though less easy to find, is Silver Twill. It's a herringbone pattern of twill woven glass fiber. So this is G10. Very good material for especially a tactical knife. It does come in black also. Everything comes in black. And speaking of black color, the next material, which is a little bit newer on the knife making stage, although it's been around for 10 years, 15 years, is carbon fiber. And carbon fiber has a great cachet for being a very high-tech, very strong, and very resilient material used in all sorts of special equipment and used in space-age technology, even bicycles. Cars are being made out of it, and even the Boeing 787 is almost entirely made of carbon fiber. Comes in various thicknesses. Generally speaking, it's going to be black. There are some variations with colorants put into it, different ways of molding the fibers in there. This is a zebra pattern. And this is a woven pattern. This is the most common. But any of these patterns are pretty strong. They're made basically the same way that the micarta and the G10 are made, with material being mixed with a resin, in this case an epoxy usually, and compressed into shape. Once again, this is a dangerous material to work with because of the dust. It's carbon dust, and it can be very damaging to the lungs and the throat. So you want to definitely, as with the G10, definitely wear a mask when you're grinding and shaping. And once again, I don't recommend cutting it on a bandsaw because bandsaw blades don't like this material. They don't like G10, but they really don't like carbon fiber. You'll instantly ruin a really good bandsaw blade just by taking a few, even small cuts with carbon fiber. So I use, as I mentioned with the G10, diamond saws, a diamond cutoff saw, a diamond ring saw, underwater with a water flood. It keeps the dust down, and also the diamond is not affected by this material at all. So you're not going to ruin a $30 to $40 bandsaw blade. Carbon fiber, G10, micarta. These are the basic materials that are being used today for handle materials, for scales. And there's a new one which has very recently come onto the stage, and that's ultem. And ultem is a very dense, high temperature plastic. It's been around for a while, but it's fairly new to knife making. Basically, it comes in this amber color, but you can also get it in black. Everything comes in black today. So this material is becoming very popular. It's really easy to work with. Cut it on a bandsaw. You can grind it. It doesn't build up, doesn't melt. It's got about a 400 degree plus melting point. So it's pretty strong and really good for a knife scale. So these are some of the materials which are man-made that are being used today in custom knives for scale materials. So let's move on to the natural handle scale materials. I'm going to start off with what's probably the most popular, it's been around for the longest period of time in custom knives, is wood. And it's not just ordinary wood. We don't usually use, normal wood like pine, for example, but we do use some of the exotic woods. Very popular now is koa from Hawaii. It's got a beautiful, what's known as chatoyance. It's kind of a glimmer as you move the light around on it. It looks especially nice when it's polished. And for a long time, one of the more popular woods that's been used on custom knives is desert ironwood. And this is one example. It's got a beautiful, tight-knit pattern. This comes from the burl of the ironwood bush. There's another type of ironwood that comes from Central America, which is greenish, and that comes from a tree. And the ironwood is known as ironwood because it's so hard. It really is very hard. The desert variety, which is this kind of brownish, generally golden colored also, is a little bit softer than the jungle type that comes out of Central America, which I've used, but it doesn't have as vibrant or beautiful a pattern to it. It has, it's pretty plain. The grain is not very swirly, but it is really, really hard. In Central America, in Spanish, it's known as quebracha, which means axe breaker. It doesn't really break axes, but it is pretty strong. And ironwood has a great history. It's been used for many years as pillow blocks or bearing blocks for propeller shafts on boats. And even big ships use blocks of ironwood, maybe not today, but they used to, because it has a natural resin in it, which keeps it lubricated. And it's a beautiful wood to work with, and it has a really nice smell when you're grinding it or cutting it. It almost smells honey-like. It's a really nice material. So koa and ebony, and rather ironwood, are the two really popular woods which you'll find on the custom knives today. So another material that I like to work with a great deal is ebony. Ebony is a very dense jet black material. It's a wood that comes out of Gabon, Africa. This is the Gabon variety. There's another called Makassar, which is black with brown streaks in it. I use that also, but not quite as often as the Gabon ebony, which is my favorite. This used to be used for piano keys. It also used as fretboards on guitars and violins. It's a little bit restricted now. I get old pieces from suppliers that used to supply piano makers and so forth. The pianos now, I think, are made of plastic or something. The originals were made of ebony, and my knives use the real ebony. Another wood which I like a lot is amboina. It's a burl. It's got a very tight swirl to it. It's very strong. It doesn't have a very nice smell when you're cutting it, but it is very resilient. It doesn't seem to expand or contract with the weather, and it's another material that I like a lot. It can be very flashy, especially when it's polished. So this is amboina, the amboina burl. And the last type of wood I want to show is ancient bog oak. This is relatively new on the knife maker scene, but it's a very old material. It's called ancient because it comes out of bogs in Ukraine. This particular piece, and it comes with a little label on there, is 5,640 years old. It's material that comes from logs that have fallen into a bog or a swamp, fallen down below water level into the mud, and been preserved from the oxygen in the air, so therefore it never rotted. And you can get this material up to, I think, about 7,000 years old. But it comes from, as I said, Ukraine. It's a wonderful material to work with. It's a little bit smelly. It's oak. It's basically oak. If you've ever worked with oak, you know what it smells like. And I do recommend with this, as with just about all of the materials, that you wear a mask, at least a good face mask, if not a respirator. And cut this up with a bandsaw. It carves very nicely. It is a good, strong material, and it really has a nice history to it. So this is the ancient bog oak, and this is one of the woods that I really like to work with a great deal. So these are the woods that I use. Many knife makers use them. There are a lot of other woods. Cocobolo is also one of my favorites. But you can get a variety of materials that fall into the natural category, and we're going to be looking at some others right now. This is staghorn, and the best material comes out of India. It's called sambar stag. It comes in basically cut up pieces, or you can buy what they call sticks or crowns. And there are some knife makers who like to use the crowns on larger fixed blade knives, and they also carve these into all sorts of shapes and gargoyle heads and grotesque faces. But anyway, this is stag. It's a material that's relatively easy to work with. It cuts very nicely on the bandsaw. It does warp when you grind it. If you were to grind, for example, on the flat to make it thinner, it's going to warp on you. And generally the warp is in a direction that's going to be contrary to what you want. It's not going to be whatever you want. So what I usually do is, if I grind it, let it sit for a few hours and cool off, and then I hand sand it on coarse sandpaper relatively gently, and that'll make it nice and flat again to fit onto the handle of the knife as a scale. It's a premium material. It's a beautiful material to work with, especially when polished. It will be very resilient, hold up to a lot of weather, and it's been used for hundreds of years on all kinds of knives all over the world. So this is India sambar stag. The next variety of natural material that I want to show comes from, most of them come from Africa. And I'm going to show you the full pieces These are horns from various types of antelopes, usually. Most of them have names like hartebeest, gemsbok, springbok, and this is springbok. This is gemsbok, but Cape buffalo. Most of the names are Afrikaans because most of these come from South Africa. I often buy the horns, just like this. They come from the animal, just like that, looking down. Or the gemsbok, which is really long. Once again, African antelope. And what I'll do with these is split them down the middle with a bandsaw and then flatten them out into usable shapes that can go onto the handle of the knife. I do that by heating the pieces in oil and then pressing them between two boards. You heat them in oil because water doesn't get hot enough. They have to be up to about 400, 420 degrees. Water boils at 212, so it's not going to be hot enough to actually bend the material. This Cape buffalo is one of my favorites. This is a difficult material to work with because it's so rough. But once you start to polish it and cut it down and buff it, it comes up really, really nice. Jet black, and I tend to leave as much of the rough surface as possible without, of course, hurting your hand. The hartebeest is also one of my favorites. It's a very dense material. All of these can be cut with a bandsaw very easily. They can be drilled and tapped if necessary. And I'm really happy to use this material because in Africa, the people in the out in the veldt capture these animals and they hunt them and they harvest those for food. So they feed the villages with them. So the villagers then sell the horns and the pelts and use the money for veterinarians and for medicines to help keep the herds of antelopes healthy and vibrant. And it's a very sustainable way of dealing with the herds. And it's something that I really support, and I think it works very well. And the last material that I want to show is what I consider to be the king of handle materials for a custom folding knife or even a custom fixed blade knife. And that is mastodon or mammoth. And this is tusk material found in Russia, Siberia, Canada, and Alaska. It's found in the tundra or under the hard surface of a frozen area in those countries. And it absorbs chemicals as it's been sitting there for the past 25 to 40,000 years. So the material is pretty old. It's been around. It generally is quite resilient. It's tough. This type of material has been used for hundreds of years on knives throughout the world. And it's a beautiful material when polished. It can be carved. It also has a great feel to it. You can hold a knife with this type of handle material on it, and it just feels warm and comfortable and historical, which it is. Because like I said, it's 25 to 40,000 years old. It's been around a long time. Most of the material comes in browns and golds and tan colors. Some of it we've been able to get even recently in the blues and greens, which are very popular, and it's probably the highest price of the handle material. This particular type of material, mammoth or mastodon, is quite expensive. It can be several $100s for a pair of scales that go onto a knife, but it's well worth it and will really increase the value of the knife that you're making. And I do want everybody to know that no mastodons were injured in the making of this video. So this is the Cadillac, the king of handle materials, and we're going to move on now to episode 3. Episode 3 will cover the design and anatomy of the liner locked folding knife, particularly the ATCF. So you're going to need a pencil and paper because there are going to be some drawings involved in this whole thing and maybe a little bit of high school geometry. So that'll be in episode 3. I'm proud to have Burr King as one of the sponsors for this series. I've made all my knives on the 3 Burr Kings in my shop since 1986.
It's pedal to the metal, keeping on that grind. Gotta keep it moving, never looking behind the story. It's the blade and the sparks, they gonna fly. There's beauty in the making when you're taking your time. Sure as it beats working 9 to 5. It's easy when you love it and you're busy living that sharp life.